Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Iron Man 2008 Movie Review. Iron Man is a 2008 American superhero film based on the Marvel Comics character of the same name. Produced by Marvel Studios and distributed by Paramount Pictures, it is the first film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU. Directed by Jon Favreau and written by the teams of Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby and Art Markham and Matt Holloway, the film stars Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark/Iron Man alongside Terrence Howard, Jeff Bridges, Gwyneth Paltrow, Leslie Bibb, and Shaun Toub. In the film, world-famous industrialist and master engineer Stark builds a mechanized suit of armor to escape from captivity by a terrorist group, and then uses it to become the superhero Iron Man. A film featuring Iron Man was in development at Universal Pictures, 20th Century Fox, and New Line Cinema at various times since 1990 before Marvel Studios reacquired the rights in 2005. Marvel put the project in production as its first self-financed film, with Paramount Pictures distributing. Favreau signed on as director in April 2006 and faced opposition from Marvel when trying to cast Downey in the title role. The actor was signed in September. Filming took place from March to June 2007, primarily in California to differentiate the film from numerous other superhero stories that are set in New York City. During filming, the actors were free to create their own dialogue because pre-production was focused on the story and action. Rubber and metal versions of the armor, created by Stan Winston's company, were mixed with computer-generated imagery to create the title character. Iron Man premiered in Sydney, Australia, on April 14, 2008, and was released in the United States on May 2 as the first film in Phase 1 of the MCU. It was a commercial success, grossing over $585 million and becoming the 8th highest grossing film of 2008. It also received positive reviews from critics, who praised Downey's performance and Favreau's balance of character development and special effects. Iron Man was nominated for Best Sound Editing and Best Visual Effects at the 81st Academy Awards, among numerous other accolades, and was named one of the 10 best films of the year by the American Film Institute. In 2022, the Library of Congress selected the film for preservation in the United States National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. 2 sequels have been released, Iron Man 2, 2010, and Iron Man 3, 2013. Tony Stark, who has inherited the defense contractor Stark Industries from his late father Howard Stark, tours in war-torn Afghanistan with his best friend and military liaison, James Rhodey Rhodes, to demonstrate the new Jericho missile. After the demonstration, his convoy is ambushed by a terrorist group, the Ten Rings, and Stark is gravely wounded by a missile used by the attackers, one of his company's own. He is captured and imprisoned in a cave by the Ten Rings. Yinsen, a fellow captive and doctor, implants an electromagnet into Stark's chest to keep the shrapnel shards that wounded him from reaching his heart and killing him. Ten Rings leader Rasa offers Stark freedom in exchange for building a Jericho missile for the group, but he and Yinsen believe that Rasa will not keep his word. Stark and Yinsen secretly build a small, powerful electric generator called an arc reactor to power Stark's electromagnet and construct a prototype armored suit to aid in their escape. Although they keep the suit hidden, the Ten Rings discover their intentions and attack the workshop. Yinsen sacrifices himself to divert them while the suit powers up. The armored Stark battles his way out of the cave to find the dying Yinsen, then burns the Ten Rings' weapons and flies away, crashing in the desert and destroying the suit. After being rescued by Rhodes, Stark returns home and announces that his company will cease manufacturing weapons. Obadiah Stane, his father's old partner and the company's manager, advises Stark that this will bankrupt Stark Industries and ruin his father's legacy. In his home workshop, Stark builds a sleeker, more powerful version of his improvised armor suit as well as a more powerful arc reactor for it and his chest after testing a prototype. Personal assistant Pepper Potts places the original reactor inside a small glass showcase. Though Stan requests details, a suspicious Stark decides to keep his work to himself. At a charity event, reporter Christine Everhart informs Stark that his company's weapons were recently delivered to the Ten Rings and are being used to attack Yinsen's home village. Stark dons his new armor and flies to Afghanistan, where he fends off the terrorists and saves the villagers. While flying home, Stark is intercepted by the Air Force and reveals his secret identity to Rhodes over the phone to end the attack. Meanwhile, the Ten Rings gather the pieces of Stark's prototype suit and meet with Stan, who has been trafficking arms to the Ten Rings and has staged a coup to replace Stark as Stark Industries CEO by hiring the Ten Rings to kill him. He subdues Rasa, has his group killed, and reverse engineers a massive new armor suit from the wreckage. Seeking to track his company's illegal shipments, Stark sends Potts to hack into its database. She discovers that Stan hired the Ten Rings to kill Stark, but the group altered their plans when they realized they had a direct route to Stark's weapons. Potts meets with Agent Phil Coulson of SHIELD, an intelligence agency, to inform him of Stan's activities. Stan's scientists are unable to replicate Stark's miniaturized arc reactor, so Stan enters Stark's home, stuns Stark, and steals the one from his chest. Stark manages to replace it with his original reactor. Potts and several SHIELD agents attempt to arrest Stan, but he dons his suit and overpowers them. Stark fights Stan but is outmatched without his new reactor to run his suit at full capacity. The fight carries Stark and Stan to the top of the Stark Industries building, where Stark instructs Potts to overload the large arc reactor powering the building. This unleashes a massive electrical surge that causes Stan to fall into the reactor, and he is killed in the explosion. The next day, at a press conference, Stark publicly admits to being the superhero the press has dubbed Iron Man. In a post-credits scene, SHIELD director Nick Fury visits Stark at his home, telling him that he has become part of a bigger universe, and that he wants to discuss the Avenger Initiative. In April 1990, Universal Pictures bought the rights to develop Iron Man for the big screen, with Stuart Gordon to direct a low-budget film based on the property. By February 1996, 20th Century Fox had acquired the rights from Universal. In January 1997, Nicolas Cage expressed interest in portraying the character, while in September 1998, Tom Cruise expressed interest in producing as well as starring in an Iron Man film. Cruise later declined the role as he was not comfortable on taking it. Jeff Vintar and Iron Man co-creator Stan Lee co-wrote a story for Fox, which Vintar adapted into a screenplay. It included a new science fiction origin for the character, and featured Modok as the villain. Tom Rothman, president of production at Fox, credited the screenplay with finally making him understand the character. In May 1999, Jeffrey Kane was hired to rewrite Vintar and Lee's script. That October, Quentin Tarantino was approached to write and direct the film. Fox sold the rights to New Line Cinema the following December, reasoning that although the Vintar/Lee script was strong, the studio had too many Marvel superheroes in development, and we can't make them all. By July 2000, the film was being written for New Line Cinema by Ted Elliott, Terry Rossio, and Tim McCanlies. McCanley's script used the idea of a Nick Fury cameo to set up his own film. In June 2001, New Line Cinema entered talks with Joss Whedon, a fan of the character, to direct, and in December 2002, McCanlies had turned in a completed script. New Line took a unique approach to writing the film's script, hiring David Hayter, David S. Goyer, and Mark Protasevich to sit in a room and simply talk on camera about Iron Man for a few days. After this, Hayter was hired in 2004 to write a script. He reworked scripts that had been written by Jeff Vintar and Alfred Goff and Miles Miller, which had included the villain the Mandarin and Pepper Potts as a love interest. Hayter removed the Mandarin and instead chose to pit Iron Man against his father Howard Stark, who becomes War Machine. Hayter said, "You want to try to mirror your hero with your villain as much as possible," for his reasoning behind making Howard the villain. He also made Bethany Cabe the film's love interest over Potts. In December 2004, the studio attached director Nick Cassavetes to the project for a target 2006 release. However, this deal ultimately fell through, and the Iron Man film rights returned to Marvel. In November 2005, Marvel Studios worked to start development from scratch, and announced Iron Man as their first independent feature, because the character was their only major one not already depicted in live action. Paramount Pictures was announced as Marvel's distribution partner for Iron Man. According to associate producer Jeremy Lacham, "We went after about 30 writers and they all passed, saying they were uninterested in the project due to both the relative obscurity of the character and the fact that it was solely a Marvel production. When the film did have a script, even the requests for rewrites were met with many refusals." Early scripts for the film also directly referenced Sony Pictures' Spider-Man 2, 2004, by identifying Stark as the creator of Otto Octavius's bionic arms. In order to build the general public's awareness of Iron Man and elevate him to the same level of popularity as Spider-Man or Hulk, Marvel conducted focus groups, trying to find a way to remove the general perception that the character is a robot. The information Marvel received from the focus groups was used to formulate an awareness-building plan, which included releasing 3 animated short films ahead of the film's release. The shorts were called Iron Man Advertorials, and were produced by Tim Miller and Blur Studio. Jon Favreau was hired to direct the film in April 2006, and he celebrated getting the job by going on a diet, resulting in him losing 70 pounds, 32 kilograms. Favreau had wanted to work with Marvel producer Avi Arad on another film after they both worked on Daredevil, 2003. The director found the opportunity to create a politically ambitious ultimate spy movie in Iron Man, citing inspiration from Tom Clancy, James Bond, and RoboCop, 1987, and compared his approach to an independent film if Robert Altman had directed Superman and Batman Begins, 2005. Favreau wanted to make Iron Man a story of an adult man literally reinventing himself after discovering the world is far more complex than he originally believed. He changed the Vietnam War origin of the character to Afghanistan, as he did not want to make a period piece. Art Markham and Matt Holloway were hired to write the script, while Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby wrote another version, with Favreau compiling both teams' scripts, and John August then polishing the combined version. Comic book staff Mark Miller, Brian Michael Bendis, Joe Quesada, Tom Brevoort, Axel Alonso, and Ralph Macchio were also called upon by Favreau to give advice on the script. In May 2006, Arad left Marvel Studios to become an independent producer. Because he was on staff when the deal was made for Iron Man, he retained producer credit on the film. By July 2006, Matthew Libatique was attached to serve as cinematographer. Favreau planned to cast a newcomer in the title role, as those movies don't require an expensive star. Iron Man's the star, the superhero is the star. The success of X-Men and Spider-Man without being star-driven pieces reassures that the film does have an upside commercially. Those considered for the role included Jim Caviezel, Timothy Olyphant, and Sam Rockwell. Rockwell was approached and was interested, but did not get the role. Rockwell would later portray Justin Hammer in Iron Man 2, 2010. Feige said Clive Owen was the studio's top choice for Stark and he was offered the part, but was not interested. Favreau met with Robert Downey Jr. and became convinced that he was the right actor for the role. Favreau chose Downey, a fan of the comic, because he felt the actor's past made him an appropriate choice for the part, explaining, "The best and worst moments of Robert's life have been in the public eye. He had to find an inner balance to overcome obstacles that went far beyond his career. That's Tony Stark." Favreau faced opposition from Marvel Entertainment executives in casting Downey but would not take no for an answer, saying, "It was my job as a director to show that it was the best choice creatively. Everybody knew he was talented. Certainly by studying the Iron Man role and developing that script I realized that the character seemed to line up with Robert in all the good and bad ways." Casting. Director Sarah Halley Finn suggested Downey create an audition tape to help persuade them. The executives were still not convinced, despite Favreau and Feige recommending Downey for the role, which resulted in Favreau leaking to the press that Downey was in talks. The positive reaction and enthusiasm to this story helped convince the executives, and Downey was cast in September 2006. Downey earned $500,000 for the role. While preparing for filming, Favreau and Downey were given a tour of SpaceX by Elon Musk. Downey said, "Elon was someone Tony probably hung out with and partied with, or more likely they went on some weird jungle trek together to drink concoctions with the shamans." Additional casting for the film occurred over the next few months. Terrence Howard was announced in the role of Stark's best friend James Rhodey Rhodes in October 2006. He had been the first actor cast for the film. Don Cheadle had also been approached for the role of Rhodes, and would eventually replace Howard in the role starting with the sequel, Iron Man 2. Rachel McAdams was offered the role of Virginia Pepper Potts, but turned it down to focus on her family. Gwyneth Paltrow was cast in the role instead in January 2007, and Jeff Bridges was cast in an undisclosed role in February. Choosing a character to be the main villain of the film was difficult, as Favreau felt Iron Man's arch-nemesis the Mandarin would not feel realistic, especially after Mark Miller gave his opinion on the script. The Mandarin had originally been envisioned as a rival to Tony Stark with a building of his own right next to Stark Industries, with the Mandarin eventually drilling a hole underneath Stark Industries to steal all of Stark's technology for himself. Associate producer Jeremy Lacham described such story as crazy, terrible and underwhelming. Favreau felt only in a sequel, with an altered tone, would the fantasy of the Mandarin's rings be appropriate. The decision to push him into the background was compared to Sauron in The Lord of the Rings, or Palpatine in Star Wars. Favreau also wanted Iron Man to face a giant enemy. The switch from Mandarin to Obadiah Stane was done after Bridges was cast in that role, with Stane originally intended to become a villain in the sequel. A version of the script intended to show Stane had escaped his damaged suit. The Crimson Dynamo was also a villain in early drafts of the script, including at one point combining the character with the Mandarin. Favreau felt it was important to include Easter egg references for fans of the comics, such as giving the two fighter jets that attack Iron Man the call signs of Whiplash 1 and Whiplash 2, a reference to the comic book villain Whiplash, and including Captain America's shield in Stark's workshop. Favreau wanted the film to be believable by showing the construction of the Iron Man suit in its 3 stages. Stan Winston, a fan of the comic book, and his company, who Favreau worked with on Zathura, 2005, built metal and rubber versions of the armor. The Mark I design was intended to look like it was built from spare parts. The back is less armored than the front, because Stark would use his resources for a forward attack. It also foreshadows the design of Stane's armor. A single 41 kg, 90 pounds, version was built, causing concern when a stuntman fell over inside it, though both the stuntman and the suit were unscathed. The armor was also designed to have only its top half worn at times. Stan Winston Studios built a 3.0 meter, 10 feet, 360 kg, 800 pounds, animatronic version of Ironmonger, Obadiah Stane, a name which Stane calls Tony Stark and himself earlier in the film as a reference, but is never actually used for the suit itself in the film. The animatronic required 5 operators for the arm, and was built on a gimbal to simulate walking. A scale model was used for the shots of it being built. The Mark II resembles an airplane prototype, with visible flaps. Iron Man comic book artist Adi Granove designed the Mark III with illustrator Phil Saunders. Granove's designs were the primary inspiration for the films, and he came on board the film after he recognized his work on Favreau's MySpace page. Saunders streamlined Granove's concept art, making it stealthier and less cartoonish in its proportions, and also designed the War Machine armor, but it was cut from the script about halfway through pre-production. He explained that the War Machine armor was going to be called the Mark IV armor and would have had weaponized swap-out parts that would be worn over the original Mark III armor, and that it would have been worn by Tony Stark in the final battle sequence. Production was based in the former Hughes Company sound stages in Playa Vista, Los Angeles, California. Howard Hughes was one of the inspirations for the comic book, and the filmmakers acknowledged the coincidence that they would film Iron Man creating the flying Mark III where the Hughes H-4 Hercules was built. Favreau rejected the East Coast setting of the comic books because many superhero films had already been set there. Filming began on March 12, 2007, with Matthew Libatique serving as director of photography. The first few weeks of filming were spent on Stark's captivity in Afghanistan. The cave where Stark is imprisoned was a 150 to 200 yard, 140 to 180 m, long set, which had movable forks in the caverns to allow greater freedom for the film's crew. Production designer J. Michael Rivas saw footage of a Taliban fighter in Afghanistan, and saw the cold breath as he spoke. Realizing remote caves are actually very cold, Riva placed an air conditioning system in the set. He also sought Downey's advice about makeshift objects in prison, such as a sock being used to make tea. Afterwards, Stark's capture was filmed at Lone Pine, and other exterior scenes in Afghanistan were filmed at Olancha Sand Dunes, where the crew endured 2 days of 40 to 60 mph, 64 to 97 km/h, winds. During 3 days of filming at the Edwards Air Force Base in mid-April, around 150 service members were cast as extras. Other production assistance by the United States Department of Defense included the provision of fabric for 100 uniforms, F-22 Raptors, 2 HH-60 helicopters and a Park C-17. In return, the Department of Defense consulted on the film regarding certain scenes and dialogue depicting the military. This included changing Stark from being opposed to arms deals, to instead becoming one who sells his technology to the US military. Exterior shots of Stark's home were digitally added to footage of Point Dume in Malibu, while the interior was built at Playa Vista, where Favreau and Riva aimed to make Stark's home look less futuristic and more Grease Monkey. Filming concluded on June 25, 2007, at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, Nevada. Favreau, a newcomer to action films, remarked, "I'm shocked that I on schedule. I thought that there were going to be many curveballs." He hired people who are good at creating action, so the human story like it belongs to the comic book genre. There was much improvisation in dialogue scenes, because the script was not completed when filming began. The filmmakers had focused on the story making sense and planning the action. Favreau felt that improvisation would make the film feel more natural. Some scenes were shot with 2 cameras to capture lines said on the spot. Multiple takes were done, as Downey wanted to try something new each time. It was Downey's idea to have Stark hold a news conference on the floor, and he created the speech Stark makes when demonstrating the Jericho weapon. Downey improvised the film's final line, "I am Iron Man," which Feige felt was in line with the character's personality. Bridges described this approach as a $200 million student film, and noted that it caused stress for Marvel executives when the stars were trying to come up with dialogue on the day of filming scenes. He also noted that in some instances, he and Downey would swap characters for rehearsal to see how their own lines sounded. Paltrow was less comfortable with improvisation, so Favreau would take notes on things she said during rehearsals or in offhanded moments that were in line with the character to incorporate into Potts' dialogue. The crew conceived a post-credits scene featuring Nick Fury and called Samuel L. Jackson to ask him if he would be interested in playing Fury, as Jackson had learned a few years earlier that his likeness had been used for Fury in the Ultimate Marvel Comics imprint. However, according to Lacham, Jackson originally appeared without any deal for him to reappear in later films. It was just this weird idea that maybe people give a shit if we stick it on the end. The dialogue for the scene was also changed on set, with comic writer Brian Michael Bendis providing 3 pages of dialogue for the part, and the filmmakers choosing the best lines for filming on set. It was filmed with a skeleton crew in order to keep the cameo a secret, but rumors appeared on the internet only days later. Feige subsequently had the scene removed from all preview prints in order to maintain the surprise and keep fans guessing. An alternate version of the Nick Fury post-credits scene was filmed, in which he specifically mentions gamma accidents, radioactive bug bites and assorted mutants, referencing Hulk, Spider-Man and the X-Men, but this was cut due to Sony Pictures and 20th Century Fox holding the respective film rights to Spider-Man and the X-Men at the time. Favreau's main concern with the film's effects was whether the transition between the computer-generated and practical costumes would be too obvious. He hired Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, to create the bulk of the visual effects for the film after seeing Pirates of the Caribbean, At World's End and Transformers. The orphanage and the embassy did additional work, with the latter creating a digital version of the Mark I armor. To help with animating the more refined suits, information was sometimes captured by having Downey wear only the helmet, sleeves, and chest of the costume over a motion capture suit, and skydivers were filmed in a vertical wind tunnel to study the physics of flying. For shots of the Mark III flying, it was animated to look realistic by taking off slowly, and landing quickly. To generate shots of Iron Man and the F-22 Raptors battling, cameras were flown in the air to provide reference for physics, wind, and frost on the lenses. Favreau conceived of the head-up display shots so audiences would not become disconnected from Stark when watching scenes with the CG Iron Man. When editor Dan Lebenthal started compiling an initial edit of the film in late 2007, it was quickly realized that the final act of the film was not working, as it was basically two robots punching each other. They tried shortening the sequence, which did not help as it became both emotionally unsatisfying and abruptly anticlimactic. Marvel rehired Markham and Holloway, as all of the screenwriters had been released from their commitments at the end of filming, who suggested the act should call back to earlier in the film when Stark was learning that one of the limitations of the suit was it freezing at high altitudes. Favreau was hesitant to commit to this change, as it would cost an additional $6 million. However, the impending writers' strike forced him to move forward with this idea, with Markham and Holloway submitting a draft of the ending on November 4, 2007, a day before the strike began. Given no further rewrites could occur because of the strike and Bridges unable to participate in shooting new material, ILM worked with as much previously shot footage as possible to rework the film's ending. Composer Ramin Djawadi had been a fan of the character Iron Man as a child, saying that he always liked superheroes that actually don't have any superpowers. After Favreau's previous collaborator John Debney was unavailable to score the film, Djawadi sought out the role himself. Favreau had a clear vision of heavy metal music and guitars for the project, saying that Tony Stark was more of a rock star than a traditional superhero. Djawadi subsequently composed most of the film's score on guitar, before arranging it for orchestra. Djawadi had help with arrangements and additional cues from Hans Zimmer and Remote Control Productions, and Rage Against the Machine guitarist Tom Morello, who also makes a cameo appearance in the film, contributed guitar performances to the score. The film also features a big band-style arrangement of the Iron Man theme song from the 1966 cartoon The Marvel Superheroes from frequent Favreau collaborators John O'Brien and Rick Boston. A soundtrack featuring Djawadi's score was released by Lionsgate Records on April 29, 2008. In July 2006, with the film still in pre-production, Favreau and Arad attended San Diego Comic-Con to promote the film, where the film's armor design, drawn by Adi Granov, was revealed along with the announcement that the Mandarin was intended to be the antagonist of the film. The following year, Favreau returned to San Diego Comic-Con to once again promote the film with Downey and Feige, where a teaser trailer was shown. With much of the visuals not yet ready, Favreau worked with ILM to have the flying shots ready, saying, "I knew that I had to make a splash because there was zero anticipation for the film at the time." Stan Winston Studios also brought a life-sized replica of the film's armor to display at the convention. Marvel and Paramount modeled their marketing campaign for Iron Man on that of Transformers. In May 2008, Sega released an official tie-in video game based on the film on multiple gaming platforms. Downey, Howard, and Toub reprised their roles from the film. A 30-second spot for the film aired during a Super Bowl 42 break. Hasbro created figures of armor from the film, as well as Titanium Man, who appears in the video game, and the armor from the World War Hulk comics. The 7-Eleven convenience store chain helped promote the film across the United States, and LG Group also made a sponsorship deal with Paramount. Worldwide, Burger King and Audi promoted the film. Favreau was set to direct a commercial for the fast food chain, as Transformers director Michael Bay did for that film. In the film, Tony Stark drives an Audi R8, and also has an American cheeseburger from Burger King after his rescue from Afghanistan, as part of the studio's product placement deal with the respective companies. 3 other vehicles, the Audi S6 sedan, Audi S5 Sports Coupe and the Audi Q7 SUV, also appear in the film. Audi created a tie-in website, as General Motors did for Transformers. Oracle Corporation also promoted the film on its site. Several tie-in comics were released for the film. Iron Man premiered at the Greater Union Theatre at George Street, Sydney, on April 14, 2008. The film began releasing in international markets on April 30, and was released in the United States on May 2. Iron Man was the first film released in Phase 1 of the MCU. It was reformatted and screened in IMAX for the first time on August 30, 2018, as part of Marvel Studios' 10th anniversary IMAX festival. The film was released by Paramount Home Entertainment on DVD and Blu-ray disc on September 30, 2008, in the United States and Canada, and on October 27 in most of Europe. DVD sales were very successful, selling over 4 million copies the first week and generating a gross of over $93 million. There were a total of 9 million copies sold and an accumulated total sales of over $160 million, not including Blu-ray. For the home releases of the film, the image on the newspaper Stark reads before he announces he is Iron Man had to be altered because of amateur photographer Ronnie Adams filing a lawsuit against Paramount and Marvel for using his on-location spy photo in the scene. A Walmart exclusive DVD release included a preview of the animated series Iron Man, Armored Adventures. The film was also collected in a 10-disc box set titled Marvel Cinematic Universe, Phase 1, Avengers Assembled, which includes all of the Phase 1 films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was released by Walt Disney Studios Home Entertainment on April 2, 2013. The IMAX enhanced version of the film was made available on Disney Plus beginning on November 12, 2021. Iron Man grossed $319 million in the United States and Canada, and $266.8 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $585.8 million. Reuters reported that the film's production budget was around $150 million with another $75 million for marketing costs. In November 2008, Marvel reported around $60 million in net box office revenue for the film. In its opening weekend, Iron Man grossed $98.6 million in 4,105 theaters in the United States and Canada, ranking first at the box office, giving it the 11th biggest opening weekend at the time, 9th widest release in terms of theaters, and the 3rd highest grossing opening weekend of 2008 behind Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and The Dark Knight. It grossed $35.2 million on its first day, giving it the 13th biggest opening day at the time. Iron Man had the 2nd best premiere for a non-sequel, behind Spider-Man, and the 4th biggest opening for a superhero film. Iron Man was also the #1 film in the United States and Canada in its 2nd weekend, grossing $51.2 million, giving it the 12th best 2nd weekend and the 5th best for a non-sequel. On June 19, 2008, Iron Man became that year's first film to pass the $300 million mark for the domestic box office. On review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, 94% of 278 critics gave Iron Man a positive review, with an average score of 7.6/10. The critics' consensus reads, "Powered by Robert Downey Jr.'s vibrant charm, Iron Man turbocharges the superhero genre with a deft intelligence and infectious sense of fun." Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 79 out of 100 based on 38 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Critics praised Downey's performance and Favreau's balance of character development and special effects. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on an A+ to F scale among the major trade journals. Todd McCarthy of Variety called the film an expansively entertaining special effects extravaganza with fresh energy and stylistic polish, while Kirk Honeycutt of The Hollywood Reporter praised the film, while nonetheless finding disappointment a climatic battle between different Iron Man prototypes. How did Tony's nemesis learn how to use the suit? In one of the first major daily newspaper reviews, Frank Loves of Newsday lauded the film's emotional truth, pitch-perfect casting and plausibly rendered super science that made it faithful to the source material while updating it, and recognizing what's made that material so enduring isn't just the high-tech cool of a man in a metal suit, but the human condition that got him there. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film 4 out of 4 stars, praising Downey's performance and stating, "At the end of the day it's Robert Downey Jr. who powers the lift-off, separating this from most other superhero movies." A.O. Scott of the New York Times called the film an unusually good superhero picture. Or at least, since it certainly has its problems, a superhero movie that's good in unusual ways. Among the specialty press, Garth Franklin of Dark Horizons commended the impressive sets and mechanics that combine smoothly with relatively seamless CG, and said, Robert Downey Jr., along with director Jon Favreau, helped this rise above formula. The result is something that, whilst hardly original or groundbreaking, is nevertheless refreshing in its earnestness to avoid dark dramatic stylings in favor of an easygoing, crowd-pleasing action movie with a sprinkle of anti-war and redemption themes. Among major metropolitan weeklies, David Edelstein of New York Magazine called the film a shapely piece of myth-making. Favreau doesn't go in for stylized comic book frames, at least in the first half. He gets real with it, you'd think you were watching a military thriller, while conversely, David Denby of The New Yorker gave a negative review, claiming a slightly depressed, going through the motions feel to the entire show. Gwyneth Paltrow, widening her eyes and palpitating, can't do much with an antique role as Stark's girl Friday, who loves him but can't say so. Terrence Howard, playing a military man who chases around after Stark, looks dispirited and taken for granted. IGN's Todd Gilchrist recognized Downey as the best thing in a film that functions on autopilot, providing requisite story developments and character details to fill in this default origin story while the actors successfully breathe life into their otherwise conventional roles. Brent Simon of Screen Daily positively called the film a slickly attractive, well-cast, and solidly constructed piece of mainstream action-adventure entertainment. The film was nominated for Best Sound Editing and Best Visual Effects at the 81st Academy Awards, with other accolades including nominations for an Art Directors Guild Award, an Artios Award, a British Academy Film Award, a Cinema Audio Society Award, a Costume Designers Guild Award, a Critics' Choice Award, 3 Golden Reel Awards, a Grammy Award, a Hugo Award, 4 Satellite Awards, winning 2, 8 Saturn Awards, winning 3, a Screen Actors Guild Award, and 5 Visual Effects Society Awards. Iron Man was selected by the American Film Institute as one of the 10 best films of the year, and it was featured on more than 100 year-end lists of the top 10 films of 2008. In the 2010s, Empire named the film as one of the 500 greatest movies of all time and Tony Stark as one of the 100 greatest movie characters of all time. In 2022, the Library of Congress selected Iron Man for preservation in the United States National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Feige said this selection meant the film has stood the test of time and, it is still meaningful to audiences around the world. Favreau, Downey, Paltrow, Gregg, and Jackson all returned for Iron Man 2, which was written by Justin Theroux and released in the United States on May 7, 2010. Don Cheadle replaced Howard in the role of Colonel Rhodes, who becomes War Machine in the sequel. Also starring are Mickey Rourke as Ivan Vanko, Sam Rockwell as Justin Hammer, and Scarlett Johansson as SHIELD agent Natasha Romanoff / Black Widow. Iron Man 3 was released on May 3, 2013, by Walt Disney Studios following Disney's acquisition of Marvel Entertainment. Favreau opted not to direct the film but still reprised his role as Happy Hogan. Downey, Paltrow, and Cheadle also returned, with Shane Black taking over as director, from a screenplay by Drew Pearce. Also starring are Guy Pearce as Aldrich Killian and Ben Kingsley as Trevor Slattery, an actor who poses as the Mandarin. In preparation of Avengers: Infinity War, I'm taking a look back at each of the films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. First up is the one that started it all, 2008's Iron Man. In it, we see the transformation of military industrialist Tony Stark, Robert Downey, Jr., from self-indulgent millionaire playboy to one who sees the ill effects of his life's work and attitudes. As we see the Marvel films get bigger and bolder in their choices and settings, it's surprising to see how contained this film is in its scope and overall story arc. While there are more personal films to follow, Iron Man flies in with quick-wit dialogue and action everywhere it is needed. It's obvious in watching it what made it a runaway hit for the upstart of it all. If Iron Man hadn't worked as a film and as a character, I wouldn't be writing this today, but RDJ is the primary reason it all does. One cannot understate how phenomenal his casting was and is for the role. Not only can he play all the emotions, he brings his own wit and charm to the part of a comic book character who was not always likable. No worries of that here. The film immediately gets up and running, throwing us into the crux of the film alongside Robert Downey, Jr., owning it all with an immediate confidence that has done the overall series innumerable favors, even before the title card is shown. While the origins of Tony are adapted to the more modern, post-9/11 origins of Middle Eastern terrorist attacks as opposed to the original Vietnam set abduction, the core story of it all stays the same, with the spirit from the pages penned by Stan Lee brought to life. Abducted by terrorists bent on using Stark to create weapons for them, Tony, with the help of another prisoner, Yinsen, Shaun Toub, creates an armored suit and electromagnet arc reactor to power his escape. Seeing how his weapons are being utilized by armed forces and terrorists alike, Stark returns home to the US on a mission to rectify his legacy and help the world, instead of hurt it. That crisis of conscience is what propels this film along, as well as his following films, and while we may not be in the business of making bombs, I think that his dilemma is one that all, at some point in life, will relate to: how to come to terms with who we are, what we are doing, and the impact that has on the world around us, here and later. Following 2007's Transformers, this film was made to entertain along the same lines. I remember watching it upon release that, like the spinning and whirring of the Autobots and Decepticons transforming, the intricacies of the late Stan Winston's original suit designs in this film were a delight to watch. That hasn't changed in the slightest. We may have gotten used to Tony continually reinventing his armors and arsenal over the course of many films, but his moments of suiting up in this film are just as entertaining as they've ever been. It's often said that mask films leave viewers aloof, because we can't see the person underneath fully emoting, but this film, and all subsequent ones, rectify this problem by allowing us opportunities to see Stark close up within his helmet. Whatever he sees, hears, and says, we are right there alongside as an audience. It's definitely the most effective way to get us to root for our hero and understand him, and overall, I think it makes the experience of watching it all much more experiential. To be fair, the story and plotting here are all pretty standard stuff, but the casting all around and production design make the film a delight to watch, even 10 years post-release. Gwyneth Paltrow, Pepper Potts, Jeff Bridges, Obadiah Stane, Terrence Howard, James Rhodey Rhodes, played by Don Cheadle in sequels, and Clark Gregg, Agent Phil Coulson, all perfectly fit their parts here and truly bring them to life with every bit of the talent we come to expect from all of them. I keep my reviews as spoiler-free as I can, yes, even for movies that have been out for a decade, but I will say that Jeff Bridges does some very good, underappreciated work here as Stan. Every time I have watched it, I pick up on a little more of what he was going for. I was surprised at, overall, how little happens, in regards to earth-shattering, rock-em sock-em action. Many comic book adaptations nowadays blow up the world and then put it back together again, or not, but here, aside from some Middle Eastern war-torn villages and caves, a few spots in Stark's penthouse, and some California streets, there isn't wanton destruction with billions in damages left behind after the credits roll. Economical is a word I would use to describe the film, a fact related by director, Jon Favreau, on the approach taken when making the film. Beyond a cost of what we see on screen, it dashes in just enough comedy, action, romance, etc. on top of an easy-to-understand change of heart story, making a really great experience all around for just about anyone who could watch it. This is exactly the type of movie you can put on, just about any time, and get some enjoyment out of it, even if you can't invest your full attention. Establishing the MCU, this film does some things that parents should be aware of. There are several instances of language and some sexual content and innuendo throughout. Obviously, none of it is R-rated, but Tony Stark, while idolized within his robot suit by young boys the world over, does have some rough edges that shouldn't be mimicked or emulated by them. With regard to Christian content, nothing is there at face value, but seeing someone think about how they want to be remembered and course-correcting their behavior, repenting, if you will, is definitely a Christian message. Hopefully, that is your Christian story in life, as well. I could see someone using this movie to illustrate that we are all a work in progress, hence, the further character development of Stark and the countless revisions to his armor, but all of us can and should make a change if our lives are leading others, and ourselves, to ruin. See where the Easter eggs start, and aside from getting used to some recasting that comes later, sorry, Rhodey and Howard Stark, it all gets the shared universe of films started off nicely. Granted, it might seem a little daunting getting into the MCU 10 years out, but if you're going to start somewhere, this is absolutely the place to do it, even if you feel led to skip some films along the way. Few of the films in the series at large are as accessible as this one, and while you may not love it in your top 10 films of all time, you can't beat the good time this film brings, whether you watch it once or several times. It was with some trepidation that I approached the Iron Man movie on opening night. The ads seemed to jibe with a pro-war, pro-global military-industrial complex message. That seemed the safest route to take to commercial success, as our own war drags on and all the more critical war movies of the past few years have failed to attract audiences. Marvel movies have only been raked over the coals in recent years when they failed to burn up the box office. Certainly a gung-ho approach seemed in line with the widescreen violence so vital to the success of the Ultimates comic book universe, which has had a major conceptual influence on most of the recent Marvel films. Did the Ultimate Universe designers realize they were auditioning for Hollywood with every updated character from the very start? And who better to play an indifferent playboy womanizing alcoholic than the dissolute but glamorous Robert Downey Jr.? My radical left-wing cabal of buddies had already condemned the film as some sort of Michael Bay/ID4 mishap. But this cabal isn't the same as my comic geek cabal, who were simply unabashedly excited. I decided to take a risk and hang with the latter group. And I was very pleasantly surprised. Here was a movie about a warmongering corporation I could actually enjoy. Tony Stark doesn't have quite the wake-up call to a serious life of heroism that Bruce Wayne got in Batman Begins. He didn't lose his family in a tragic act of violence. The major threats were directed squarely at his own person as the primary target, and his struggle to survive as a POW evinces a different sort of hero than the frightening, vengeful Batman. Iron Man is the overprivileged genius who earns his wealth through practical hard-working applications of that genius, not to mention defiant sneakiness. This is a movie about the boy's own story fantasies of laboratory invention of astounding devices, many of which are glorified guns and rockets, without a lot of sexism at its core. Oh, Tony is a womanizer, but it's interesting that the two, only, major female roles in the film are held by working women. Leslie Bibb plays a reporter, albeit one who finds it hard to resist Tony's charms, and her first and last scenes are both in a work context where she puts Tony on the spot. And Gwyneth Paltrow, shockingly likable for once, plays Pepper Potts not as Stark's secretary or maid, but as his majordomo, and updated his Girl Friday with even a little bit of that old Hollywood Rosalind Russell flair and style. Pepper is adept in all the ways of dealing with an intimidating genius, including not taking any of his copious BS, and quite resourceful when called to act as his agent in dangerous contexts. Downey and Paltrow have a sparky chemistry that only lets them down when the script veers into unlikely, but thankfully brief, moments of mush. The suit looks great, better than expected. There's some real choreography involved in the movements of Stark's bodyguard in metal alloy, and he's a sleek and streamlined creation that acknowledges an evolutionary link to a sort of best home kit motorcycle ever. But the suit doesn't overshadow Downey Jr., who carries the entire movie from start to finish. He's note perfect as Stark, silly and flippant when time allows, dreadfully serious and enraged when under distress. This is a Tony Stark that could make some sense of the emotional confusion of the Civil War story, if some version of it ever makes it to film. Downey Jr. is an open live wire throughout the movie, one that allows empathy and identification, that in fact demands it, and with very little hamminess. Like Stark himself, he's on his game. There is a major flaw to the film, though, and that's the villain. Updating the war to the unspecified recent Gulf unrest of the current day, we're dealing with terrorists who very loosely evoke the Mandarin, cursory gestures, Easter eggs for fanboys only. But mostly war crimes are envisioned as mercenary greed, personified by Jeff Bridges. He tries his best to give some shine to his enabling mentor, but it's a stock role and the blandishments of F. Murray Abraham probably couldn't have revived this pale and bitter Salieri. The movie lacks a satisfying resolution due to the simplistic fisticuffs at the end, but then the last 15 minutes spend most of their time screaming sequel, which is nothing but good news. The ending isn't rife with giant plot holes, it's just depressingly formulaic. Perhaps I only notice because the rest of the movie achieves so much more, making these four-color fantasies human, vulnerable, and real in such satisfying and entertaining ways. If talent of this level can be applied to the upcoming Marvel adaptations and updates, the future looks bullish indeed. Iron Man is a film straddling a knife's edge between being extraordinarily good and being effective middleweight entertainment, and the difference between those 2 points is the difference between two men, Robert Downey, Jr., and Jon Favreau. Both rather odd choices to lead a comic book movie and summer tentpole, and only one of them earns the title of an inspired choice. In the first film self-financed by Marvel Studios, Downey plays Tony Stark, the Howard Hughes-inspired crazy industrialist who we first saw in the spring of 1963 building himself a super-powered suit of armor to escape from the Vietnamese prison where he was held captive. That's been tweaked a little bit, of course. Now it's an Afghanistan warlord who captures the weapons developer Stark, visiting the US military on a sales trip. In all his incarnations in all media, however, one thing remains constant: Tony Stark is a playboy who likes expensive toys and gorgeous women, and has something of a sense of entitled superiority. If this sounds like the kind of role that professional sarcastic asshole Downey is very good at playing, it should. Downey is very good in the role. Very good is underselling it by a considerable margin, actually. In Downey's hands, Tony Stark instantly becomes one of the great characters in the whole of the superhero movie, creating a figure that can stand alongside Christopher Reeve's Clark Kent and Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne, and pretty much nobody else. Downey as Stark is the beating heart that makes the whole movie tick, mixing humor and a slightly desperate edge and scuzzy charm all up in a cocktail of character psychology that is rarely seen in a comic book movie and never as much fun as it is here. It's thanks to Downey that I realized that this film of Iron Man isn't about Iron Man at all, it's about the man who chooses to pretend to be Iron Man, and why he does it. In this as in many ways, the film is quite close to being a retread of Batman Begins, except without brutal nihilism. And as good as Robert Downey, Jr. is for Iron Man, so is Iron Man good for Robert Downey, Jr. I'm honestly not sure that I've ever seen the actor in a role with quite as much range as Tony Stark. The comic book movie ain't what it used to be, kids. He's a raconteur, a guilt-ridden bomb maker, an avenging angel, the smartest guy in the room, and it's rare that he only has to be one of those things at a time. Downey's versatility in gliding through Stark's emotions is something to behold, and prove, if we needed it, that he's one of the most capable actors in the movies today. But I did promise that the film was on a knife's edge, didn't I? Iron Man was directed by Jon Favreau, a man whose name is likelier to call to mind Swingers, which he didn't direct, than any of the handful of films which he did. Since that handful includes Maid, Elf and Zathura, it's an open question whether that association helps or harms Favreau's reputation. But this much is clear, he's not necessarily the strongest director to ever helm a blockbuster. Without question, Iron Man is his greatest film, and much of what makes it work is entirely the director's fault. It was his innovation to encourage the actors to ad-lib. Like a Robert Altman directed Superman, says the director, he chose to represent the Iron Man outfit using practical effects whenever it was remotely possible to do so, and I assume he has something to do with the film's effortless pace, in which a 126-minute film seems far too short. No mistake, Iron Man is a hell of a lot of fun, and a great start to the summer season, and the bar has definitely been raised for the next 3 months. You'd have to hold a personal grudge against the idea of comic books not to find it a delicious entertainment. Thing is, we're in a very rare moment where superhero movies get to be more than delicious entertainments. At their best, they can be legitimate great cinema by any yardstick, not just the stunted knobby one we use to discuss popcorn movies. And that takes a stronger authorial voice than Favreau is capable of offering. Think about the great movies in this genre in the last decade: Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, X2, Batman Begins. Each one of those films had a clear personality, and each of those films was made by a filmmaker with a strong voice. Admittedly, 2 of those films aren't much fun in any useful sense, but the Raimi films in particular prove that you can have a roller coaster movie that also has a lot of art backing it up. I'm not saying that Iron Man doesn't have strong themes, I'm not saying that it's bad in any possible definition of that word. I'm not even saying a strong personality is the only thing that makes a comic book movie worthwhile. Hulk and Superman Returns had personality. I'm saying that it feels kind of disposable, without the sort of iconography that makes you think about it for days and weeks, trying to figure out how it works. It's a lot of fun while you're watching it, but it doesn't wedge itself in your head. It doesn't force us to reconsider the possibilities of what a comic book movie can be. It's a solid entertainment, and while it's easy to wish it were more than that, it's worth pointing out how much less it could have been. Put it another way, if this turns out to be below the top tier for the year's blockbusters, we're in for a hell of a summer. Multi-billionaire Tony Stark has it all: overwhelming intellect, an extremely profitable business, multiple women, and a charming personality. However, when he decides to go overseas to demonstrate a new missile created by his company, Tony is captured by a terrorist group and forced to build one for the enemy. Tony realizes that his only way out is to build the first prototype of his infamous power armor, because, you know, power armor is the first logical choice one can make to escape from terrorists. He must continue his research into arc reactor technology and become Iron Man. Let me start by saying that Tony Stark is insufferable to listen to, at first. He begins his character arc as a fat cat businessman with no care for the people under him or even those that admire him. Later, he progresses on a trajectory that grows slightly more interesting as the film continues, which gives the viewer hope for the future. Note the key word here: slightly. Stark is far from what I consider to be an intriguing character. Also, the plot is utterly generic and predictable with villains that ultimately fall flat. We've seen this story countless times before, and this is even far from a good iteration of that story. The worst offender of the script is the overabundance of action cliches that fail to captivate the viewer. Iron Man should be fun to watch, but it's just not. Of course, this can partially be attributed to the Robert Downey Jr. plays Tony Stark, the film's primary protagonist. While his acting is far from perfect at this point in his career, it is more than competent and hints at where he might eventually be able to rise thanks to his theatricality. Next we have Terrence Howard as James Rhodes. Howard doesn't really get that much screen time, but he does well with what's written on the page. It's unfortunate he never gets another shot at playing the character. Then there's Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts. Paltrow is surprisingly good in this role, her delivery always on point and her chemistry with RDJ apparent. Finally we have Jeff Bridges and Shaun Toub as Obadiah and Yinsen respectively. Toub plays his role decently enough, but isn't given enough character development to truly care about what we're seeing on screen. Bridges, however, easily steals the show with his convincing portrayal of a man torn between his loyalty to Howard Stark and his own ambition. It's a stark juxtaposition, sorry about that. There's no other way around it. Jon Favreau is not only an awful actor as Happy, he also poorly directs this first film in the Iron Man franchise. He crafts a generic blockbuster with little soul and no reason at all to ever return to it. The cinematography is simplistic and unoriginal, barely maintaining my interest through the film's slog of a script. The visuals aren't that interesting in general, though, with numerous unnecessary explosions happening all the time. It honestly felt like a Michael Bay film, and no, that's not a compliment. Perhaps the worst facet of Iron Man's production is its soundtrack. The movie opens with AC/DC, which sets the tone instantly. You're in for a repetitive film that offers nothing new to the superhero genre. The rest of the soundtrack is just as weak. The only things I liked about the production were the intricate use of lighting, the CGI, and the editing. These elements were generally ahead of their time. All aid in developing an excellent film, even if the final product wound up being quite lackluster. The worst offender of the script is the overabundance of action cliches that fail to captivate the viewer. Iron Man should be fun to watch, but it's just not. Am I being too hard on Iron Man? Maybe, but the film is objectively blockbuster trash that's easily outclassed by many of Marvel's hell, even DC's later offerings. This isn't the superhero movie you've been waiting for. I had never heard of the Marvel comic book hero, Iron Man, until I saw the trailer for the new movie, a few months ago. Mind you, I had heard of Iron Man's alter ego, Tony Stark. The latter's name had been mentioned in several internet articles written about Spider-Man. Which is why I could not summon any excitement when I saw the trailer for the new movie starring Robert Downey, Jr. Until the release of 2000's X-Men, I have never been that familiar with most of Marvel Comics' costumed crime fighters, with the exception of Spider-Man, the Hulk and the Fantastic Four. I had spent a great deal of my recreational time with DC Comics characters like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman. Just about anyone could imagine my reaction when I learned that Robert Downey Jr. had been signed to portray Tony Stark aka Iron Man. Not particularly thrilled. But I was impressed by the major cast of actors who had signed up for the film: Downey, Gwyneth Paltrow, Terrence Howard, and Jeff Bridges. All four performers have been favorites of mine over the years, along with director Jon Favreau. And since Iron Man was a Marvel Comics film, I decided to give it a chance. I might as well say it right now. Iron Man has already become one of my favorite movies of 2008. And if I must be honest, I think it is one of the best superhero movies I have ever seen, hands down. I would place Iron Man in the same golden circle as X-Men 2, X United, 2003, Spider-Man 2, 2004, and Batman Begins, 2005. Yes, it is that good. What would be the point of focusing upon the movie's many virtues, when my previous statements pretty much said it all? But I am going to try, anyway. And I would like to start with the excellent screenplay written by Mark Fergus, Hawk Ost by Arthur Markham, and Matthew Holloway. They managed to create a good, solid story focusing upon Iron Man's origins. In an unusual move, the writers began the story with Tony Stark in Afghanistan in the company of an army escort. Stark had just presented a demonstration of Stark Industries' latest weapon, the Jericho missile. While Stark jokes around with his military escort, Afghan terrorist group called 10 Rings. At this point, the movie rewind back to 36 hours earlier before Stark's departure from the States. This opening immediately conveyed to me that the movie might turn out to be 10 times better than I had originally assumed. By the time Tony Stark uttered those last words, "I'm Iron Man," it proved me right. There are two aspects of Iron Man that truly made it a cinematic gem for me. One happened to be Jon Favreau's direction. The other turned out to be the movie's superb cast. And speaking of the cast, I might as well start with the man of the hour. What can I say about Robert Downey Jr.? He is Tony Stark, aka Iron Man. Downey now owns the role. I have never seen an actor take possession of a role so thoroughly since Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood, Daniel Craig's debut as James Bond in Casino Royale, and Johnny Depp as Captain Jack Sparrow in the Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy. Downey is also the first actor or actress I have seen portray a comic book hero as a Wises. And he also managed to produce sparks with not only his supporting cast, but also with an android and a computer voice. Supporting Downey was Terrence Howard as U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel James Rhodey Rhodes, Air Force liaison to Stark Industries and personal friend of Tony Stark. Howard portrayed Rhodes as a stalwart military man who found Stark's cavalier life both exasperating and enduring. I have never seen Howard do comedy until this movie. And I was surprised to discover that his flair for comic timing seemed to match Downey's. Some people have pointed out his role had been reduced. I cannot say that I agree. 1. He had yet to become War Machine, Tony's future armored crime fighting partner. However, his line, "Next time, baby," as he glanced at the extra armor suit seemed to hint that he will play a bigger role in future movies. And 2. Howard possessed such a strong on-screen presence that no one was bound to forget. No matter how many scenes he had. When I first learned that Gwyneth Paltrow would be playing Stark's personal assistant, Virginia Pepper Potts, I found myself wondering if her career was in a decline. Playing the main hero's girl Friday seemed like a step down, even from her role in Sky Captain, World of Tomorrow. Fortunately, the script and Paltrow's witty and elegant performance gave her the opportunity to rise above the usual cliché of the girl Friday role. Mind you, Pepper Potts never struck me as interesting as the charming and conniving Polly Perkins from Sky Captain. But instead of becoming the damsel in distress, Paltrow ended up helping Stark/Iron Man to defeat the main villain. Good show. Speaking of villains, I must applaud Jeff Bridges for portraying one of the smoothest that I have seen on the silver screen, namely Tony Stark's business partner and mentor Obadiah Stane. Not even Ian McDiarmid's pal Patton from Star Wars had possessed such subtlety when it came to evil. At first glance, Bridges did not seem the type who could effectively portray a villain. Then I recalled his performance in the 1985 thriller with Glenn Close, Jagged Edge, in which he portrayed a similarly subtle villain. Being a skillful actor, Bridges managed to convey many aspects of Stane's personality, a superficial warmth and intelligence that hid a murderous and manipulative streak. Another memorable villain was portrayed by actor Farhan Tahir, who portrayed Rasa, leader of the terrorist group, the 10 Rings, hired to kidnap Stark while the latter was in Afghanistan. Like Bridges, Tahir did an admirable in projecting villainy with suave sophistication and a strong presence. In regard to a strong presence, I could say the same about Shaun Toub, who portrayed Dr. Ho Yinsen, an Afghan surgeon and captive of the 10 Rings that saved Stark's life. I have seen Toub portray some interesting characters over the years. But I must admit that his warm, yet firm portrayal of Yinsen made me realize that he possessed quite a commanding presence. As I had earlier pointed out, the movie's 4 screenwriters managed to produce a script that featured a very solid story. Unlike many other comic book movies, Iron Man seemed to be laced with a great deal of witty dialogue and humor. There were times when I wondered whether I was watching a superhero action film. But there was plenty of action-filled scenes to remind me that this movie was basically an adventure film, like Iron Man's 2 encounters with the Ten Rings group in Afghanistan, his encounter with 2 U.S. Air Force fighter planes and his showdown with Stana in downtown Los Angeles. Director Jon Favreau, along with the 4 screenwriters and cast, managed to bring together all of the action, humor, and drama with perfect balance. Okay. Let me rephrase my last sentence. Perhaps Iron Man was not completely perfect. In fact, it was not really perfect at all. I do have some quibbles about the movie. One of them happened to be the first sequence in Afghanistan. I realized that the setting of Iron Man's origins could not be in Vietnam. And it would make sense for the setting to be changed to either Iraq or Afghanistan. The problem is that most of the sequence featuring Stark's captivity by the Ten Rings was boring as hell. It almost seemed to drag forever. And matters did not help much that most of the sequence was set inside a series of caves. Another problem I had with the movie was its score. Quite frankly, I found it unmemorable. But I am not surprised. I can only think of 3 comic book hero movies that had a score or theme song I found memorable. Unfortunately, Iron Man is not one of them. And if I must be brutally honest, I would not regard the film's narrative as particularly original or mind-blowing. The plot for Iron Man was basically a paint-by-the-numbers comic book hero origin story. Only the character of Tony Stark made it unique. At least back in 2008. But despite the first Afghanistan sequence and the movie's score, it is easy to see why Iron Man proved to be one of the best summer movies of 2008. With Jon Favreau in the director's chair and Robert Downey Jr. as the leading man, the movie became, well, briefly, one of the best of its genre. It figures. Just when everything's going your way, something comes along and messes things up. For some people, it's an unexpected illness, an overdrawn bank account or a traffic accident 1 block away from work. Before that happens, Stark's on top of the world. With more money than Donald Trump and more smarts than the profs at MIT, he can buy anything he wants: houses, cars, women. And if he can't buy it, he can make it. He can outthink Einstein, outparty Paris Hilton and outspend Bruce Wayne. Stark's not bothered by the fact that his company, Stark Industries, has created some of the world's most notable weapons of war. Nor does he lose sleep knowing his palatial Malibu estate was paid for by their sale. In fact, he goes to the Middle East to demonstrate the most powerful non-nuclear munition yet, something called the Jericho missile. So there is a certain amount of irony wrapped up in the fact that when Stark's convoy gets ambushed, it's with weapons from his own company. Stark almost dies in the assault. Then his captors demand that he build a Jericho system for them. It appears that he has no choice but to follow their orders. Or does he? Instead of using the materials he's given to make that missile, Stark fashions a nifty suit of armor for himself that facilitates his escape as he creates a mini Armageddon in the middle of the terrorists' hideout. He tells the world that Stark Industries will no longer make its money by selling superior firepower, saying, "I don't want a body count to be my only legacy." He also laments, "I had become part of a system that had become comfortable with zero accountability." Some of the credit for Stark's transformation goes to his kind cellmate, Yinsen, who advises him, "Don't waste your life." Yinsen values his family deeply. He asks Stark if he has a wife and children, and is saddened to learn he does not. "So, you're a man who has everything and nothing," Yinsen tells Stark. Indeed, Iron Man is an ethical rags-to-riches story in which the morally impoverished Tony Stark finds that true wealth is found in good deeds, not good stock options. He appears to mourn, very belatedly, the death of his father, whom he never got to say goodbye to. He realizes that loyal assistant Pepper Potts is more than just a very efficient girl Friday, she's the only friend he has in the world. Most importantly, he has a sudden yen to help the very people his weapons have been hurting, so he pours tons of his own money and time into a new superhero suit that'll help him do just that. Though Pepper protests, he tells her that, in his heart, he knows what he's doing is right. Characters are willing to give their lives for others. At least one pays that ultimate price. Stark's path to becoming Iron Man is, in many ways, as spiritual as you can get without reciting Bible verses. He is an archetypical woeful sinner who wasted much of his life on wine, women, and weapons. While he doesn't find God, specifically, he does find what he considers a purpose when he has what one might call the Marvel Comics equivalent of the Apostle Paul's Damascus Road experience. No longer is he blind to what's going on around him. No longer is his life aimless. He has a reason to live. A calling. Heightening the parallel, that calling is sustained by a glowing power source close to his heart, a nod to a new soul, and involves an effective high-tech suit of spiritual armor. Elsewhere, as a man is bleeding out from a variety of gunshot wounds, he says, "My family is dead. I'm going to see them now." Stark is well known as a womanizer, prompting a soldier to ask him whether he's gone 12 for 12 with the models on last year's Maxim covers. Stark says he missed one, but since December featured twins, 12 is still the right number. There are a few other innuendos and sexual comments as well, one of which is a joke about a man mistakenly hooking up with a transvestite. A mistaken identity gag gives a nod to Hugh Hefner. And we see Stark hanging out with immodestly dressed women. Pepper wears a revealing, backless gown. Stark and Straight Arrow military man Jim Rhodes ride one of Stark's private jets that's staffed with midriff-bearing flight attendants and a stripper pole. When a female Vanity Fair reporter asks Stark how he can sleep at night, Stark answers that he's prepared to lose a few hours of sleep with you. He does exactly that in the film's most glaring sexual scene. Briefly, we see them aggressively kissing, grappling, and rolling in bed together. We don't see any nudity. True to its comic book roots, Iron Man is violent and frenetic at times. The opening scene in which several US soldiers are taken out by explosions and gunfire may be the most disturbing. One bomb rips through a Humvee, while the vehicle Stark is riding in gets riddled with gunfire. All the soldiers protecting Stark presumably die, and Stark himself is nearly blown up by a mortar round. He survives, of course. And we see a hazy sequence of him going under the knife while in serious pain. When he wakes up, he has a grotesque device implanted in his chest, a device that Stark upgrades a couple of times and, at one point, has Pepper help him install. Pepper is appalled by both the idea of, and by the actual act of, stuffing her hand inside this unnatural body cavity. "It's just like operation," Stark assures her, then warns her not to let the wires touch the sides. She slips, giving him an electrical shock. When she withdraws her hand, it's loaded with slime. As Iron Man, Stark takes out dozens of bad guys via guns, missiles, flamethrowers and sheer brute force. A couple are killed when they open a booby-trap door. One ends up killing himself by firing at Iron Man, the bullet bounces back and hits his head. Iron Man captures an enemy lieutenant and drops him off in the middle of a bevy of civilians the lieutenant and his men had been torturing. "He's all yours," Iron Man solemnly intones before flying off. A villain immobilizes rivals with a high-pitched tone that also causes their veins to bulge. Stark is tortured. One of the methods used that we see is his head being thrust underwater. His heart support is ripped out of his chest. Another man is nearly force-fed a hot coal. Later, after getting shot off-screen, we see that man die. A group of baddies is executed off-screen. And a man is about to be executed in front of his screaming family when Iron Man intervenes. Iron Man has an intense encounter with a couple of F-22s, and in a separate incident, nearly falls to his death after flying too high. He accidentally bashes himself around while developing the suit. And he doesn't just endanger himself. His reckless testing puts others at risk too. Iron Man's climactic Transformers-like battle involves lots of action and peril, and several innocent bystanders wreck their cars trying to avoid the mayhem. The battle also leads to the apparent death of one of the combatants. Stark drinks like a dehydrated guppy before his conversion, and even takes a drink or two after it. We see all manner of intoxicating beverages consumed: whiskey, sake, martinis, etc., and at one point Stark tells Rhodes that it would be irresponsible not to drink. Rhodes at first declines, but we later see him, drink in hand, rather tipsily talking with Stark. There's quite a bit of smoking, too. Cigarettes, a cigar, and a pipe in the hands of Marvel impresario Stan Lee during his standard cameo. In a gross-out moment, Stark pulls a long tube out of his nose. He shoots craps in a casino. He shows very little regard for traffic laws or public airspace. And he eats a Burger King cheeseburger, inadvisable, you'd think, for anyone with a heart condition that necessitates a glowing motor in an unnatural chest cavity. Rhodes twists the truth and covers for Stark when it comes to keeping Iron Man a secret, and not shooting him out of the air with missiles. Iron Man emphasizes loyalty, restitution, and the responsible use of power by individuals and nations. But this superhero is not merely a Spider-Man clone. And that has a lot to do with his origin story. No radioactive spider bite. No exposure to gamma rays. Stark isn't accidentally endowed with new skills. His heroic journey involves an arrogant sinner coming to grips with his own depravity and choosing to change. So the film's underlying message is that being virtuous is better than being rich, that we all have unexpected callings, that we, like Stark, live for a reason, are inspiring, biblical, and, in today's fame and fortune at any cost society, downright countercultural. Still, the gold's buried beneath the surface, and this iron blade that's visible could have done with a bit more sharpening. Stark's road to redemption is littered with bodies and takes several detours by way of questionable, unfortunate decisions and actions. When I caught up with Iron Man, a broken hip had delayed me and the movie had already been playing for 3 weeks. What I heard during that time was that a lot of people loved it, that they were surprised to love it so much, and that Robert Downey Jr.'s performance was special. Apart from that, all I knew was that the movie was about a big Iron Man. I didn't even know that a human occupied it, and halfway thought that the Downey character's brain had been transplanted into a robot, or a fate equally weird. Yes, I knew I was looking at sets and special effects, but I'm referring to the reality of the illusion, if that make any sense. With many superhero movies, all you get is the surface of the illusion. With Iron Man, you get a glimpse into the depths. You get the feeling, for example, of a functioning corporation. Consider the characters of Pepper Potts, Gwyneth Paltrow, Stark's loyal aide, and Obadiah Stane, Jeff Bridges, Stark's business partner. They don't feel drummed up for the occasion. They seem to have worked together for a while. Much of that feeling is created by the chemistry involving Downey, Paltrow, and Bridges. They have relationships that seem fully formed and resilient enough to last through the whole movie, even if plot mechanics were not about to take them to another level. Between the two men, there are echoes of the relationship between Howard Hughes and Noah Dietrich in Scorsese's The Aviator, 2004. Obadiah Stane doesn't come on screen waving flags and winking at the camera to announce he is the villain. He seems adequately explained simply as the voice of reason at Stark's press conference. Why did Stark, during that scene, make me think of Staring Mad? Between Stark and Pepper, there's that classic screen tension between friends who know they can potentially become lovers. Downey's performance is intriguing, and unexpected. He doesn't behave like most superheroes, he lacks the psychic weight and gravitas. Tony Stark is created from the persona Downey has fashioned through many movies, irreverent, quirky, self-deprecating, wisecracking. The fact that Downey is allowed to think and talk the way he does while wearing all that hardware represents a bold decision by the director, Jon Favreau. If he hadn't desired that, he probably wouldn't have hired Downey. So comfortable is Downey with Tony Stark's dialogue, so familiar does it sound coming from him, that the screenplay seems almost to have been dictated by Downey's persona. There are some things that some actors can safely say on screen, and other things they can't. The Robert Downey Jr. persona would find it difficult to get away with weighty, profound statements, in an entertainment, anyway. A more serious film like Zodiac is another matter. Some superheroes speak in a kind of heightened, semi-formal prose, as if dictating to Bartlett's familiar quotations. Not Tony Stark. He could talk that way and be Juno's uncle. Iron Man doesn't seem to know how seriously most superhero movies take themselves. If there is wit in the dialogue, the superhero is often supposed to be unaware of it. If there is broad humor, it usually belongs to the villain. What happens in Iron Man, however, is that sometimes we wonder how seriously even Stark takes it. He's flippant in the face of disaster, casual on the brink of ruin. It's prudent, I think, that Favreau positions the rest of the characters in a more serious vein. The supporting cast wisely does not try to one-up him. Gwyneth Paltrow plays Pepper Potts as a woman who is seriously concerned that this goofball will kill himself. Jeff Bridges makes Obadiah Stane one of the great superhero villains by seeming plausibly concerned about the stock price. Terrence Howard, as Col. Rhodes, is at every moment a conventional straight arrow. What a horror show it would have been if they were all tuned to Tony Stark's sardonic wavelength. We'd be back in the world of Swingers, 1996, which was written by Favreau. Another of the film's novelties is that the enemy is not a conspiracy or spy organization. It is instead the reality in our own world today. Armaments are escalating beyond the ability to control them. In most movies in this genre, the goal would be to create bigger and better weapons. How unique that Tony Stark wants to disarm. It makes him a superhero who can think, reason and draw moral conclusions, instead of one who recites platitudes. The movie is largely founded on its special effects. When somebody isn't talking, something is banging, clanging or laying rubber. The armored robotic suits utilized by Tony and Obadiah would upstage lesser actors than Downey and Bridges. It's surprising how much those two giant Iron Men seem to reflect the personalities of the men inside them. Everything they do is preposterous, of course, but they seem to be doing it, not the suits. Some of their moments have real grandeur, as when Tony tests his suit to see how high it will fly, and it finally falls back toward Earth in a sequence that reminded me of a similar challenge in The Right Stuff. The art direction is inspired by the original Marvel artists. The movie doesn't reproduce the drawings of Jack Kirby and others, but it reproduces their feeling, a vision of outscale enormity, seamless sleekness, secret laboratories made not of nuts and bolts but of vistas. A lot of big-budget F/X epics seem to abandon their stories with half an hour to go, and just throw effects at the audience. This one has a plot so ingenious it continues to function no matter how loud the impacts, how enormous the explosions. It's an inspiration to provide Tony with that heart-saving device. He's vulnerable not simply because Obadiah might destroy him, but because he might simply run out of juice. That leaves us, however, with a fundamental question at the bottom of the story: why must the ultimate weapon be humanoid in appearance? Why must it have 2 arms and 2 legs, and why does it matter if its face is scowling? In the real-world competitions between fighting machines, all the elements of design are based entirely on questions of how well they allow the machines to attack, defend, recover, stay upright, and overturn their enemies. It is irrelevant whether they have conventional eyes, or whether those eyes narrow. Nor does it matter whether they have noses, because their oxygen supply is obviously not obtained by breathing. The solution to such dilemmas is that the armored suits look the way they do for entirely cinematic reasons. The bad Iron Man should look like a mean machine. The good Iron Man should utilize the racing colors of Tony Stark's favorite sports cars. It wouldn't be nearly as much fun to see a fight scene between 2 refrigerators crossed with the leftovers from a boiler room. At the end of the day, it's Robert Downey Jr. who powers the lift-off, separating this from most other superhero movies. You hire an actor for his strengths, and Downey would not be strong as a one-dimensional mighty man. He is strong because he is smart, quick, and funny, and because we sense his public persona masks deep private wounds. By building on that, Favreau found his movie, and it's a good one. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, the highest-grossing franchise in film history, an unprecedented piece of movie storytelling for both better and worse, began in 2008 with Iron Man. I was in college, so it occupies that strange temporal place in my brain of events that occurred in my adulthood and are easily recalled memories, but also took place so long ago that the world from which it sprang seems unrecognizable today. I often think of the election of Barack Obama as President of the United States shortly after my 20th birthday as the first cultural or historical event that I properly experienced as an adult, but you could just as well pick the premiere of Iron Man. Of course, no one knew what the Marvel Cinematic Universe would become when this movie debuted. So in some ways, it wasn't a noteworthy event at all. It was just another solidly crafted and entertaining superhero blockbuster back when the genre still felt pretty fresh. Sure, it has a post-credits scene and a few references to a larger superhero galaxy, but they feel mostly like playful winks in context. I should confess here that, as of the writing of this review, I have only seen 9 of 32 MCU movies. The last one I watched was Captain America: Civil War on an airplane. The last one I saw in theaters was Avengers: Age of Ultron 8 years ago. So, I am a little bit outdated on exactly what constitutes an MCU film. Thus, I will try not to overgeneralize and prescribe too much until I've seen more of it. Nonetheless, it's striking to me that Iron Man at once feels quite a bit like what the series formula, as I understand it to be, would become, and also a bit different. I don't quite dare call any of it edgy, but it doesn't feel quite so boardroom sanitized as later films in the franchise. After all, the very first scene in the movie, and therefore of the entire MCU, is a terrorist bombing in Afghanistan. One of the film's main theses is that the military-industrial complex is inherently unethical. That's more of a stand than I can imagine Disney taking in 2023. We follow Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr., a playboy billionaire genius running his late dad's defense contractor company. After an introductory flashback, he is captured by terrorists called the Ten Rings, an obvious stand-in for Al-Qaeda, while promoting the effectiveness of one of his $1 million Jericho bombs. The Ten Rings imprison him and force him to make a duplicate of his bomb for their own dangerous pursuits. Also, another imprisoned scientist, Ho Yinsen, Shaun Toub, saves Stark's life post-bombing by surgically implanting an electromagnet into his heart. This early segment of the film is its weakest because it relies so much on wonky plotting. For example, the Ten Rings are perhaps the dumbest captors in history because they don't notice that Stark builds himself a mecha suit instead of a missile. You'd think this would be obvious. There's even a shot where one of the terrorist bosses looks at Stark's blueprints and doesn't really question it. Another eye-roller comes after Stark uses his proto-Iron Man suit to blast his way out of the terrorist cell, and just so happens to get noticed by rescuers the moment he is about to perish from heat and dehydration. Deus Ex helicopter. Luckily, the second half of the film works quite well, and even that first half is pretty sleekly executed by director Jon Favreau, such that you won't mind waving away the plot hiccups. The rest of the movie, post-Afghanistan rescue, centers on Stark butting heads with two foils. First, his military best bud James Rhodey Rhodes, played here by Terrence Howard. Howard gives the only outright dud performance in the cast, never really conveying any distinct personality or charisma, so I think Marvel was smart to aggressively recast Rhodes as Don Cheadle in future films. The other apparent rival of Stark's is his mentor, Stark Industries' second-in-command, and Dad's best friend, Obadiah Stane, Jeff Bridges. Following Stark's life-threatening ordeal in Afghanistan, he gains a conscience and decides Stark Industries will no longer sell weapons. This, alas, is a major threat to the company's big profits. Here is where I question the film's reputation for rah-rah American patriotism. it's pretty critical of the country's ever-growing defense budget. The film half-heartedly teases out some suspense for whether the ultimate betrayer of Stark will be Rhodes or Stan, who both seem deeply skeptical of Stark's change of heart. Meanwhile, Stark replaces his electromagnet heart with a phlebotinum gizmo called an arc reactor, which is sufficient to power his newly developed Iron Man suit, the one we'd come to know and love. It doesn't take all that long to become obvious that the film's villain will be profit-hungry Stan, leading to a showdown where he inhabits his own Iron Man knockoff suit called Ironmonger, which is exactly the right amount of on the nose for a villain's name given the film's theme and tone. The climactic action scene is a noisy, clanging Transformers-style set piece, but one that's honestly legible and pretty exciting. It also doesn't drag on too long. The film totals 126-minute runtime, which feels downright merciful. In particular, the action scenes in this film are very high on fist pump factor. There are a lot of cool moments of adrenaline rush, whether it's Iron Man walking away from an explosion like a cool guy, emerging from smoky rubble with his iconic eye glow, or jetting around through sky like Toothless the Dragon. I was deeply skeptical of whether Iron Man would hold up, but I had a smile on my face for most of the duration. It's ultimately a generic action blockbuster, but a solid and well-assembled one. By far the biggest of the film's strength comes in its casting. In particular, Robert Downey, Jr. is a home run as Tony Stark. He is very funny and scene-stealingly charismatic. He perfects the brash but lovable billionaire persona, injecting the character with immediate personality and wit, making every time he's on screen, most of the movie, a delight. Apparently, much of the dialogue was improvised or rewritten during filming by Downey, Jr., Bridges, and Favreau. It definitely feels like Downey, Jr. helped craft the character in his image. Also, much was made at release time that the film was a comeback for Downey, Jr., who was a notorious partier much like Stark. Downey Jr. also hits the dramatic points in darker moments with the right touch. The conscience he develops over the course of the runtime is not exactly Oscar-level drama, but it's surprisingly effective and always believable, giving Iron Man an emotional backbone. Most of the rest of the cast is solid, too. Bridges is another highlight, giving some intensity to the villain Ironmonger while still passing as the kind of guy who would be a beloved father figure. Gwyneth Paltrow plays the film's love interest, Stark's humble secretary Pepper Potts, who is supposed to be a contrast to the supermodel Stark dates. The problem is that Paltrow doesn't have a frumpy bone in her body, and so she's not particularly believable as a hidden beauty requiring Stark to look deeper, which is how she is written. But Downey, Jr., and Paltrow have very good chemistry, so it never bothered me too much. It is easy to imagine an alternate version of the past 15 years of blockbuster movie history where Iron Man flopped, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe exploded on the launch pad. In fact, we won't have to wait long to see an entry in the series with similar building blocks but a fraction of the overall charm. Iron Man didn't build a multi-billion-dollar cinematic juggernaut on its own, but it laid the foundational cornerstone and remains an excellent action-packed blockbuster with good polish, energy, and a world-class central casting choice in Robert Downey, Jr. Finally independent enough to produce their own films, Marvel Enterprises has delved into motion picture territory to produce their first self-financed venture, an adaptation of their metal-clad superhero comic Iron Man. Hiring director Jon Favreau was their first correct decision, as Marvel producer Avi Arad collaborated with Favreau, acting, on the dud Daredevil. But their greatest success was not conceiving the hero's eye-popping technology or translating the story with a pitch-perfect realization for film, though both are true of this project. Rather, the genius here lies in casting Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. Bazillionaire weapons manufacturer, smart-mouth genius, and reckless celebrity playboy all describe Stark, whom Downey Jr. embodies with lovable bravado. Indeed, Favreau admits he cast the once maligned star because both actor and character share similar traits. Downey Jr.'s long battle with drug addiction was well publicized years back, while Stark has similar dark territory. The comic character is a known alcoholic, though Favreau omitted that detail in the film, alluding to Stark's dependence on the drink throughout, but never in such a manner that we raise an eyebrow. No, Stark's affliction for this origin story is his conscience, weighing down on him heavily after seeing the horrors birthed from his life's work. The story begins with Stark pitching his company's latest missile design, the Jericho, to the American military in Afghanistan. He quips to laughing soldiers that peace never earned him $1. All at once they're attacked by an ambiguous terrorist group using weapons with Stark Industries stenciled on the side. Imprisoned and barely alive, Stark requires a magnetic heart doohickey to survive, linking the character forevermore with technology to a physical extreme. He's told to build a Jericho missile by his captors or else, but instead he constructs an armored metal suit to escape, delivering a wallop to his kidnappers in the process. Upon returning home, he finds his company's long-standing yet irresponsible war profiteering shameworthy, seeing directly what damage his own weapons cause. The company's number 2, the Chrome Dome Obadiah Stana, Jeff Bridges, surprisingly well suited for his seedy role, balks at Stark's initiative to abstain Stark Industries from future arms dealings, hardened on logic that those with the biggest guns keep the peace, and incidentally, the dollars that go with weapon sales. And so, keeping his plot secret, Stark builds himself a streamlined suit capable of flight, with a seemingly unlimited source of power, and wowing sci-fi weapons to boot. Rather than sell his suit to the highest bidder within the American government, Stark initiates a personal quest to rid the world of weapons he created that now cause misery abound. Scenes with the Iron Man suit are given incredible personality, not only because Downey Jr.'s rampant, improvised dialogue is maintained, but because we're not watching a clunky piece of machinery operate. This isn't RoboCop, after all. Effects wizards at Industrial Light and Magic help construct a suit that moves freely with an actor inside, allowing for maximum flexibility. Granted, more complicated scenes of flight and battle are rendered with flawless CGI, but we never feel an absence of humanity when Iron Man is in action. Possibly because Downey Jr.'s personality is vivid enough to penetrate adamantium. What an unlikely hero Downey Jr. makes on and off screen. Immediately embodying Stark's lovable rogue persona, even his scenes shared with inanimate objects are funny. A number of the film's best, most hilarious moments involve Stark inventing the Iron Man suit, which was thankfully a long process not rushed in some cheesy montage. We grow to adore the character and the metallic mask because we witness its assembly from start to finish as a labor of love. Perpetually joy-ridden and dazzled by the confident stylings of Stark's crackerjack wit, Downey Jr. steals the character for himself and makes this movie exclusively his, which by no means is a negative. Iron Man, Tony Stark, and indeed Robert Downey Jr. make up a sort of rock and roll team befitting hard-edged guitar riffs. Ramin Djawadi's heavy metal score more than accommodates, leading inevitably to Black Sabbath's Iron Man to ring over the end credits. Sewing in grandiose, important music might have given the film an inaccurate takes itself too seriously message. The chemistry between Downey Jr. and Gwyneth Paltrow, playing Stark's dutiful and lovelorn scarlet-haired secretary Pepper Potts, works simply and believably. Also present in the cast is Terrence Howard, playing Stark's friend and soon-to-be apprentice Jim Rhodes, likely to become War Machine in a possible sequel. Rhodes takes a look at Stark's silver prototype armor and confirms next time. Every Marvel comic to film adaptation needs a Stan Lee appearance, here he's mistaken for another kind of playboy. Keep an eye out for Favreau making a welcomed cameo as Stark's bodyguard. And you may also want to wait after the credits for a brief special appearance by none other than, well, just wait and see. Marvel's money troubles over the years are no secret. They've regrouped by way of financially successful adaptations that allowed for this self-produced effort, without the need for Hollywood to put on its creative cap. Instead, Paramount Pictures only distributed Marvel's picture. Should Marvel's product do as well as expected, word has it all interested parties expect to get underway on a sequel for release as soon as 2010. Furthermore, Favreau has dropped mention in more than one interview of his plans for a potential trilogy. Couldn't come quickly enough for this critic. His film tops Marvel's adaptations, reaching the rare greatness of Spider-Man 2 and X2, X-Men United. My only hope is that Favreau's prospective sequel, S, would outdo the original as certainly as those films outdid theirs, which, considering its basis, seems quite the task. Favreau's direction may not have the conceptual stylistic application of, say, Christopher Nolan on Batman Begins or Guillermo del Toro on Hellboy, but his approach fits the characters within. Notice the balance between blockbuster-sized thrills and rewarding narrative structure. Such equilibrium is a rare treat. I think Favreau has found a perfect symmetry of popcorn-munching fun, relevant thematic content, and strong storytelling. Iron Man reaches the pinnacle, and surely goes above the comic genre to become one of the most enjoyable escapist films in recent memory. Iron Man is a 2008 superhero film and the official first entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It is not only the best in the trilogy, but also the finest Marvel movie to this date. The plot is a regular origin story, but it succeeds and it is done with great detail, emotion, humor, and it is overall very entertaining and engaging to watch. All of the sequences with the creation of Iron Man in the first half are solidly done and intense, albeit the terrorist angle is a bit annoying. But it quickly gets better in the second half with terrific romance and human drama as well, which I always appreciate the most in these blockbusters. The fight at the end is the weakest plot point as it is just way too cliched and overly aggressive. However, the conclusion afterwards is so refreshing not only because the two don't end up together with their relationship hinted upon, but also because this is one of the rare films to not have a superhero in hiding as Tony Stark reveals himself as Iron Man in the end. That is all so refreshing for comic book flicks and a very nice change in pace. The characters are the highlights, so well developed and interesting. Tony Stark is magnificent and different than the usual protagonist, which is so great. He is arrogant, not annoyingly but rather amusingly cocky. But I like how he also has a heart and a moral standing which was necessary for his superhero role. And the filmmakers balanced perfectly his emotional roles and the role of a hero with an arrogant, rich, and self-centered prick he is. That is all due to some strong character development at play here. Pepper Potts is wonderful and such a great and thankfully more likable than usual love interest. She has both a brain and heart and is capable and greatly helped him in this film, which is great. The two are such a great couple and their romance is absolutely magnificent and in my opinion one of the biggest reasons to see this film. Unfortunately, the supporting characters pale in comparison to the lead ones. Rhodes is forgettable and Obadiah Stana is just mediocre. Yes, he posed more threat to our hero than most of Marvel villains up to date, but he is still way too cartoony, comic booky, typical, and over the top even. I disliked him, and although he was quite a threat in some sequences, he was still annoying to me. The acting is phenomenal. Terrence Howard and Jeff Bridges are solid in their roles, but it is Gwyneth Paltrow who surprised me the most as she was so incredibly sympathetic, so charming even, and gave such a wonderful performance that is easily one of her best. And the chemistry between her and Robert Downey Jr. is evident. Speaking of whom, he is naturally the finest link here in probably his most defining role. He played the part with excellent comic timing, great charisma while also carrying the more emotional scenes quite well. He became his character, which is so rare and so respectable. The humor is excellent. Really good and providing a lot of smart, witty moments. The play between the two love interests is very amusing and realistic, and of course the lead carries the film on his shoulders when comedy is concerned, providing us a lot of giggles. The action sequences are okay, nothing too remarkable and not too interesting. The fight at the end is typical as is the villain, and the action should have been better realized. But the direction from Jon Favreau is very good and the film is solidly paced. The special effects are very good as well, having in mind that it is Marvel's first film. The score is very forgettable as usual for Marvel movies, but the sound effects are great. The tone is excellent, being mostly comedy, but shifting to dramatic and emotional moments as well. Now, the dialogue is stupendous without a doubt. It is one of the reasons why I enjoy this franchise so much. It is so sophisticated and so playful that you instantly like both its humor and its characters. The script is predictable, but involving. And the film does have a heart, and it is smart and refreshing in many ways. It is also one of the best superhero films I've seen, and undoubtedly the finest Marvel movie to date. Rarely have their movies come close to this level of quality. Already much has been said about Iron Man, so I won't spend a lot of time being redundant. I do, however, want to comment on a few lesser discussed aspects of Iron Man, focusing on its status and history with Marvel Comics. In short, how does it fare as an adaptation? Plus, I've got a few other thoughts for good measure. As far as Marvel characters go, Tony Stark, Iron Man's alter ego, has proven to be one of their richest and deepest individuals. Fantastic adventures aside, his established persona as a playboy genius billionaire industrialist has given way to very human tales, including his famous struggle with alcoholism, as well as his troubling self-proclaimed futurist pomposity and ego. Lately, in light of last year's epic superhero Civil War, Stark has had some bittersweet, very difficult lessons to learn, despite having led the victorious side. Although Marvel's various writers often explore his fascistic tendencies from differing degrees, the good ones understand that to villainize Stark for being who he is, an ultimately well-meaning man whose heroic qualities outweigh his flaws most any day, is dead wrong. It is this history and complexity that rends Iron Man worthy not just of cinematic treatment, but of A-list blockbuster treatment. From the very depths of my rapidly beating fanboy heart, I can attest that Jon Favreau has done it right. Considering Iron Man's traditional status with the general public as a second-tier Marvel character, it would have been easier, even understandable for the scope of his movie to be more along the lines of Ghost Rider or Daredevil rather than Spider-Man or X-Men, which this correctly falls in line with. This is big studio spare no expense entertainment, as it should be. Clearly, all parties involved threw their passions behind this effort, embracing the possibilities and history of the character, not to mention the sheer coolness of a guy fighting evil in high-tech armor. Right down to the practical, rugged yet gleaming non-CG appearance of the armor and effects, great care has been taken in all corners of this film, and fans as well as mass audiences should appreciate that, particularly when viewing this film as a setup for greater things to come. This, being Marvel's first in-house live-action production, appropriately gives us glimpses at the possibility of a unified Marvel universe on screen, a key aspect to the appeal of modern superhero comics. And that's exciting in and of itself. While films like Spider-Man and X2 were about as good as anyone could hope for in terms of presenting engaging versions of those characters cinematically, the reality of having licensed the properties to different major studios meant that the notion of a shared universe of heroes went out the window. The idea of Spider-Man swinging into Fantastic Four headquarters to get Reed's take on that pesky alien costume was simply legally impossible. And while the casting of big-name talent in these roles may eat into the perceived continuity of such interactions, how likely would Hugh Jackman be to do a 3-minute Wolverine cameo in, say, a Captain America film? Recasting, followed by fan outcry, would no doubt follow, before probably seeing the cameo altogether abandoned. The hints and tidbits alluded to in Iron Man point to the intention of even bigger and better things. On the other hand, if these hints and tidbits don't ever pay off, then that means Iron Man has unintentionally steered into Smallville territory, where unfulfilled winks and nods abound in a frustratingly impotent manner. I don't think that's the case here. Of course, being a film about an American weapons manufacturer's life-changing encounters in the Middle East, political analysis is irresistible to most people. In an American election year, no less. It's been commented upon that the politics of the film are murky, and while I agree, to a point, I don't find that a negative, nor do I find the resolution of Stark violently invading Afghanistan as Iron Man on the outset of denouncing weapons manufacturing as storytelling hypocrisy. A character hypocrisy, absolutely, which, in many ways, is the point. Militarization, capitalism, revenge, and self-declared foreign involvement make for dicey bedfellows, as history shows, but these are far bigger, more complex, far-reaching issues than the polarized vocal extremists on either side can ever fully take into account. Iron Man follows that rationale, putting the authenticity of the character and his world/situation ahead of any confining political statement the filmmakers or actors might aspire to in a lesser yarn, Transformers. In this sense, Iron Man actually occupies a rare place alongside John Ford's Ford Apache and She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. That statement will no doubt make some heads spin, but rare is the film that honestly handles true world complexities while not being about true world complexities. Jon Favreau has displayed his directorial virtuosity in such earlier films as Elf and Zathura, the latter of which demonstrates his right-thinking approach to eye-popping visual effects in the context of character-based filmmaking. The cast, which is one of the best ever assembled for a film of this type, is led unwaveringly by Robert Downey Jr. in the role he was born to play. While the personal trauma of Tony Stark in the comics certainly resembles Downey's own well-publicized torrid history, his maturity and naturalistic demeanor seal the deal in true movie star fashion. Thank God we didn't end up with Iron Teen, or some such revisionism. It's also great to see Jeff Bridges as a hiss-worthy villain, ultimately going toe-to-toe with our hero, as it should be. The biggest detractors of this film may be from parents of small children, taken aback by the unrepentant philandering and drinking of Tony Stark. While Stark is no role model in those senses, there are admirable sides to him, first and foremost his comic book world ingenuity. It is this ingenuity coupled with his willingness to literally fly into the fray that he previously only profited from that makes him someone worthy of our investments. This is not a flawless film, find me one, but the fact that so much of it hinges on the heart of its lead character, both literally and figuratively, show that in this case, the filmmakers' hearts are in the right place as well. Thank you Marvel Studios. Thank you Jon Favreau. Thank you Robert Downey Jr. Thank you for not only making the first good comic book superhero movie since 2005's Batman Begins, but also for restoring my dormant enthusiasm for what had become a favorite subgenre of mine. I grew up reading comic books, so once they started coming out with quality adaptations of comic book heroes, beginning with 2000's X-Men, I generally had a few movies a year to get geeked up about in anticipation. I loved the first two X-Men films, the first two Spider-Man films, and even the underappreciated Hulk film. But following the triumphant Batman Begins, the genre spit out 3 years of dreck, beginning with the mediocre but fun Fantastic Four, followed by the abysmal X-Men, The Last Stand, the bloodless Superman Returns, the embarrassing Ghost Rider, and the disappointing Spider-Man 3, which became a microcosm of the genre as a bloated mess that drowned in its own excesses. The result was that I no longer greeted the announcement of a new superhero adaptation with excitement, but instead dreaded what Hollywood had in store, with the lone exception being this summer's The Dark Knight. If they could screw up the Spider-Man franchise with the same players in place from the earlier two films, there wasn't much reason to suspect that they'd get new franchises right, particularly since the properties were being handed over to hacks like Brett Ratner and Mark Steven Johnson, and roles being populated by affordable non-stars like Brandon Routh. So when the early news of the Iron Man film started filtering in, I mostly met it with indifference. Jon Favreau to direct? Sure, I liked him as an actor well enough, and felt that Elf was a decent comedic vehicle for Will Ferrell, but getting the director of Zathura to helm a new blockbuster sounded like getting the director of Barbershop to helm a franchise. Oh wait, that happened. But then they cast Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, and suddenly, in spite of myself, I was intrigued. It was such an inspired casting choice that I had to take notice, and it only got better when they filled out the cast with Terrence Howard as Jim Rhodey Rhodes, Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts, and Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane. That's a surprisingly A-list cast for a film of a character who was second tier in terms of popularity throughout his career. My next problem was getting psyched for a character that I never cared all that much for. For me, Iron Man was always a cool looking costume, but I never read many of his comics, maybe 4 to 5 Iron Man issues and another dozen or so Avengers comics featuring Stark. Then the trailers started popping up, and I was forced to admit that it looked pretty good. Then the favorable buzz started filtering out of Comic-Con, and suddenly, after a few years of indifference and bitter disappointment, I found myself looking forward to the theatrical debut of Iron Man almost as much as I was the theatrical reboot of the Joker. I'm thrilled to report that Iron Man meets all the anticipation and hype, kicking off the blockbuster season of 2008 with a bang. It's big and brassy in the best traditions of the action blockbuster, without having to insult the intelligence of its audience to pull off the big thrills and effects of the genre. It captures the spirit and energy of the genre of my youth while adding enough maturity through its cast. The youngest principal cast member is Paltrow at 36, to engage an adult audience. Favreau expertly weaves physical effects with CGI, giving the action scenes a sense of realism one wouldn't expect from a movie about a guy in a high-tech suit of armor, while infusing the film with a smart sense of humor that keeps the origin-heavy story engaging. The biggest reason for the film's success is Downey Jr., who makes the Howard Hughes-esque Tony Stark more interesting than his armored-clad alter ego. Which is essential, since the movie spends more time with Stark out of his armor than it does with him in it. Usually, the extended origin story portion of superhero movies threaten to drag down the action, but Downey Jr.'s smug portrayal of the billionaire industrialist keeps it lively, while the weight and humanity he injects into the role builds the necessary pathos before the pyrotechnics begin. In fact, one of the few flaws of the film is how the big action set pieces feel a bit rushed and less impactful than the earlier character development moments. Normally, this would be a deal breaker for such a film, but Iron Man is able to invest the audience in its hero so thoroughly that its climax still satisfies while leaving room for improvement. Along with Downey Jr., credit must go to Gwyneth Paltrow as Stark's assistant and all-around girl Friday Pepper Potts. I haven't been interested in anything the actress has done since 2001's The Royal Tenenbaums, and she usually comes off as unnecessarily cold. But in Iron Man, she exhibits a natural chemistry with Downey Jr. while exhibiting a relaxed sexuality and intelligence, bringing more to the character than what I suspect was on the page. When the cast was announced, she was the principal I cared the least about, so I was pleasantly surprised when she turned out to be such an asset to the film. The love interest character is usually the weakest element of any superhero film, including the otherwise superb Batman Begins, so it's a testament to Paltrow and the film as a whole that this isn't the case with Iron Man. So comic book fans, let your geek flag fly and rejoice that after 3 years, a movie has come worthy of your obsessive devotion. My enthusiasm has now been restored, leaving me not only desperate to see The Dark Knight, but also more excited to see The Incredible Hulk, and especially excited at the prospect for a sequel to Iron Man. To that end, make sure you hang around until the end of the credits for a bonus scene. If Favreau, Downey Jr., and Marvel were able to generate this much excitement with an origin story, I can't wait to see what they can do with that out of the way. With Marvel firing on all cylinders and Phase 2 of its movie series underway, it seemed like a great time to review their Phase 1 of movies and also to take a look at the media itself. This series of articles will not only review the Marvel movies but also look at the value added by the DVDs and Blu-rays and whether it is worth your time to get the hard media. The first movie in Marvel's Phase 1 is Iron Man. One of the first things that jumps out at me as a viewer of Iron Man is that Robert Downey Jr. is amazing as Tony Stark. He really brings home the idea that Tony is a self-centered, arrogant jerk but fills him with enough humor and channels it in the right direction so that the audience is okay with following this guy. This was always going to be the most difficult aspect of doing Tony right. Stark is a control freak. He thinks that because he's a genius he is always right. Downey Jr. was both faithful to that and made the role his own. Jeff Bridges is also fantastic as Obadiah Stane. Giving Tony someone with such a connection to both his Iron Man and Tony Stark sides was a stroke of genius on the part of the writers. Anyone who has seen the DVD extras knows that originally this movie was going to feature the Mandarin along with the Crimson Dynamo. I am really happy that they didn't go this route. The two villain thing rarely works and both would have been external threats. The Ten Rings organization hinted that the Mandarin may be part of the greater story, but it was definitely acceptable not to have him in the debut movie, especially when so much of the story revolved around Tony's origin as a hero. After all, the Mandarin's ties to Iron Man's origin was a latter-day retcon anyway. He didn't show up for several issues after Iron Man debuted. I do think that several other franchises should learn from this and realize that they don't need to bring out the biggest bad guy for the first film, as then you have nowhere to go in successive movies. It would be remiss of any review not to mention Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts. Paltrow navigated such a difficult line in this movie. She had to be the perfect administrative assistant while at the same time also having some real caring for a boss who sometimes did unsavory things that she did not respect, yet also not letting her emotions rule her and having the strength of will to stand up and voice it when they could be crossing an ethical line. I think that things really went downhill almost immediately once they officially got together, but here the relationship is fresh and sparky. Through Pepper we get the feeling that at some point Tony had been a different person and that he's become more calloused over the years. It might have been nice if we'd been shown or told about some of the things in his earlier life that had shown Pepper that other side of him, or it would have been nice if there had been subtle nods to his humanity before he left the desert. The lack of these things does not detract too much from the overall narrative, but it would have been nice to have. There is also some brilliant humor between them, such as the scene where he compares her helping him with replacing his arc reactor with the classic game, Operation. For the other supporting roles, Terrence Howard really does a fantastic job at playing James Rhodes, and it is a real shame that he was replaced in the later two films. He really sells that he and Tony were friends and they had some great interplay in a way that Don Cheadle never does. Jon Favreau brings a touch of humor as Tony's head of security/driver, Happy Hogan. Happy doesn't do much in this one, but it is very amusing if you listen to the DVD extras to discover that the reason that Favreau cast himself as Hogan was because he wants to get to the point in the story where he gets to marry Pepper. This is also the movie that introduces audiences to Agent Coulson, played by Clark Gregg. It's unlikely that those who ever saw the movie back in 2008 could have realized how important Coulson would become to the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. Gregg really steals the show with his persistence and his deadpan expression during some very unlikely events, which gives his character a dry humor that really endears him to viewers. Stan Lee also made one of his trademark appearances in a Marvel film. Over the years Stan's appearances have felt somewhat intrusive, but appearing as Tony's buddy Hugh Hefner, Stan doesn't need to do anything other than stand still while surrounded by beautiful ladies. The humor injected into the scene for those who know Stan and his legacy is fantastic, but it isn't distracting or annoying for those who don't really know the comic background for the character. The update to Iron Man's mythology is well done. With much of the action taking place in Afghanistan and with talk of arms deals and insurgencies, the movie takes on a topical tone to the era, much like the original comic book had with its Cold War parable throughout the 60s down to the 90s. The movie also captured the character's love of invention, and by allowing the viewer to experience the process with Tony, it not only showed a side of his character, but as he pieces the suit together and works out what he can do, it allows the viewers to get used to this hyper-reality. All in all, it comes across as a very well-developed and polished work. What makes that even more amazing is that apparently a large part of the most important scenes were improvised. You see some of that in the DVD extras. The main flaw with the movie lies with the ending. Revealing that Tony is Iron Man just opened a can of worms, and the other movies have been dealing with it ever since. It gave a great moment at the end of the movie, but the writers of subsequent Iron Man films have been left to deal with the ramifications, and it has needlessly hamstrung the movies, making it very difficult to deal with the issues with his company and personal life now that the public knows that he's Iron Man. The second ending helps to ameliorate this somewhat. For those watching the movie for the first time in theaters, Sam Jackson's appearance was totally unexpected, and the idea of Iron Man joining a cinematic world of other superheroes was deep with promise and still manages to excite viewers with the endless possibilities today. With regard to the DVD and Blu-ray experience, Iron Man is unusual in that the 2-disc DVD edition contains more extras than the Blu-ray. Likely this is a fallout from the time when movies were released on DVD first. The Blu-ray contains the deleted scenes and a documentary on the history of the Iron Man comic. The 2-disc DVD contains those extras as well as a 90-minute featurette on the making of the movie, as well as some featurettes on the digital development and several screen tests. I checked on the extra Blu-ray included in the Phase 1 box set, and that doesn't contain these lost extras for Iron Man either, although that would have been an appropriate venue for them. Neither the DVD nor Blu-ray has a commentary track, which is very unusual for a superhero movie. Even if Favreau didn't want to sit down for a commentary or felt that he'd said everything that he wanted to say in the extras, it would have been nice to get the perspective of the writers, producers, actors, or technical people for a commentary on their work in the film. Cinema fans who buy the hard media for the extras expect these things, and it seems like a cheat not to include it. That being said, I don't think that the Blu-ray version adds a great deal to the movie. The visuals are somewhat enhanced, but your only other extra is that the audio is designed for a 7.1 surround system. For me, Iron Man remains the second best of all of the Avengers films, and it is well worth buying a hard copy for your collection. I personally recommend the 2-disc DVD set for the additional extras, which help to show the creation and evolution of the film, but if you have a 7.1 surround system, it may be worth getting the Blu-ray version with slimmed down extras. Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr., is the billionaire playboy who is the head of the weapons manufacturer, Stark Industries. He inherited the company and his brilliant mind from his late father, Howard Stark, Gerard Sanders. Tony is abroad in the Middle East with US soldiers to show off new technology from his company and secure some big military contracts, when his caravan is attacked by terrorists. He gets hit with some shrapnel from one of his own bombs and nearly dies, but a great surgeon named Shaun Toub, saves his life and puts a magnet into his chest. The terrorists have taken him captive and want him to build them a new weapon, but he's got other plans. With Jensen's help, they create a small reactor to go into Tony's chest that can keep him alive and power up the new suit they're building that will help them escape. It shouldn't be a spoiler that Tony escapes, because when he gets home, he reflects on his experience in captivity and the destruction his weapons have caused around the world, and begins making a new suit that he'll use to make things right. I remember when I heard the news that Robert Downey Jr. had been cast as Tony Stark, and I immediately thought that was a great choice. Robert Downey Jr. was the perfect pick for the character of Stark in both his look and his ability to play characters with big personalities. He embodies the character and immediately pulls you into the movie with his larger-than-life attitude and charming confidence. It's no wonder that he quickly became the highest-paid actor in the MCU because of how well he was able to establish the character and make him instantly iconic with audiences. It's not just Robert Downey Jr. who does a great job, though. The entire cast is made up of talented actors who treat the material with the respect necessary to make a comic book hero's story feel like a serious endeavor. While Obadiah, Jeff Bridges, is a little undercooked as a villain with simplistic aspirations for Stark Industries, Bridges still brings his A game to the character and makes him compelling enough to look past the character's shortcomings. Terrence Howard as Rhodey provides a great dynamic between him and Tony. He would be replaced by Don Cheadle in later films, which is a shame because he gives a great performance here. Gwyneth Paltrow, likewise, gives Pepper Potts a lot of personality to make her stand out next to Tony. The small interactions the two characters share show a chemistry and a history between them that makes them fun to watch. This film, directed by Jon Favreau, screenplay by Mark Fergus, based on Iron Man, produced by Avi Arad, starring Robert Downey Jr., cinematography Matthew Libatique, edited by Dan Leventhal, music by Ramin Djawadi, production company Marvel Studios, distributed by Paramount Pictures, release dates April 14, 2008. Running time 126 minutes. Country United States. Language English. Budget $150 million. Box office $585.8 million.